Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are thrilled to be joined by guests, unfortunately not in person. Normally this is one of our favorite Shabbats of the year, a longtime tradition in our congregation, our Interfaith Youth Shabbat, where we fill our sanctuary with members of our congregation and with youth groups from across the area who are here to learn more about Judaism. And so, given the world today, we of course can't be in person, but we do know that a number of church youth groups are joining us virtually tonight. And the ones we know of, there may be more, but the ones that we know are here are St. Vincent de Paul, Kent United Church of Christ, Wellington First United Methodist Church, Trinity United Methodist Church from Orville, and Faith Lutheran. And so we welcome all of you with us. You should have received an email earlier today from Lauren Trexler, which had a link to a digital copy of our prayer book. And so you'll notice that on the digital copy, it's much easier because you can just type in the page numbers. But our prayer book in its book form looks like this. The digital version is very similar. You can follow along with the page numbers and our prayers as we join together through the prayer book, and we'll try and explain things along the way. We encourage you, whether you are a longtime member of our congregation or whether you are joining us for the first time, to relax, to join with us, to hum the tunes if you find that they move you, to try and say the Hebrew, and to join us in the English for sure, as we welcome all of you to pray with us together. We'll begin our service with our candle blessing, which is found on page 2 in our prayer book.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Shabbat.
I forgot to mention that we're joined by, I share the bima always. I'm Rabbi Josh Brown, for those who may not know me, and I share the bima with Cantor Kathy Fromson. And this evening we're joined by Aaron Freed to beautify our music even further. And so that's who you will hear and see throughout our service. We want to begin by focusing ourselves, and so I invite you to sit back, to take a deep breath, and I want to begin our service with this thought. In a moment, we'll share the words of Psalm 96. We'll share them as a chant this evening, the words Mizmor Shir. The words of Psalm 96 actually ask us to look towards what's new. And I recently learned in a self-help book I was reading that we should look at things, instead of thinking of them as, I have to do something, we should tell ourselves that we get to do something. It's a way of appreciating every moment that we have, and that's what Psalm 96 is about. It's about looking at the world as though every day brings something new to us, something that we get to do because we get to experience that day. Even if getting to do, it means we get to go to work, or we get to exercise, or we get to clean up things around our homes. We should look forward to life, look forward to what we have in opportunities before us tomorrow. Psalm 96 allows us to take that moment now and make it a part of our prayers. And so I invite you to ask yourself, what are all the things that you get to do on this Shabbat, this next 24 hours that we have ahead of us, that we'll experience together as a community? As we share the words of Psalm 96, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, followed by the words of L'Chad Odi, our prayer that welcomes the presence of Shabbat into our sanctuaries and into our homes as though it is the beginning of a wedding. We invite you to join with us, first on page 13 and then on page 20.
Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat. La la la, ya la 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 la, ya la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la, ya la 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 la. Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, Mizmor, Mizmor Shir, Shir L'Yom HaShabbat.
Page 20.
Ya la 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 L'Chad Odi, ya la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat, Penei Shabbat Nekabela. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat Nekabela. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat Nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'diborecha, Hishmi'anu el hamayuchad, Adonai echad, u'shemo echad, l'shemo tiferet, velit hilah. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat Nekabela. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat Nekabela. Hitoreri, hitoreri, uri uri, kumi uri, uri uri, shir dabiri, kevod Adonai, alayich nila. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, la 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 Penei Shabbat Nekabela. La 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 L'Chad Odi, la 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 Likrat Kala, La 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 la, B'nai Shabbat Nekah. Bella. Please rise and face the entrance to your home to welcome in Shabbat as a bride. Boi v'shalom, ateret bala, gama b'simcha, u'v'zochola, toch emunei, am segula, boi chala, boi chala. La 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 l'chadodi, la 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 l'krat kala, la 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 b'nai Shabbat Nekah. Bella, la 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 l'chadodi, la 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 l'krat kala, la 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 b'nai Shabbat Nekah. Bella. Please join me in a prayer that we chant, and it's called the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash meraba be'alma divrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael ba'agala ba'agala uvizman kari ve'imeru Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'alam u'almei almaya yitbarach yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kodesha barichu la'elam min kol brechata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amira ve'alma v'imeru. Amen.
On pages 28 and 29, we begin prayers that lead us to what is often called the watchword of our faith, the core statement of belief, a prayer called the Shema. But first, we call ourselves to prepare to say this prayer by inviting everyone to announce that they are in fact here to pray, with the words on page 28, the words of our Baruch Hu, which translate to, praise God, to whom praise is due forever, praised be Adonai, to whom praise is due now, and forever. We invite you to rise and face east, the direction of Jerusalem. We turn now to page 33 as I'll share these words in the English, a creative translation of our prayer. If you're looking at our prayer book for the first time, you'll notice that on pages 32 and 33, it's very easy to see that there are 4 prayers there. There are actually 4 versions of the same prayer. As you move from the top right corner to the bottom left, it goes from the traditional reading in Hebrew to an English translation to a creative interpretation. And so I share this version of our Ahavat Olam prayer, the bottom of page 33, before we share the words of our Shema. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works, and the living language that gives it form. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo, Yisrael. We concentrate as best we can, often closing our eyes for the words of the Shema, page 34 and 35.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod, Shem Kevod, Malachuto, Leolam, Leolam Vahid. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And all these words which I command you on this day shall be in thy heart, shall be in thy heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt speak of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, and when thou risest up, and when thou liest down, and when thou liest down. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be for frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them on the doorposts of thy house, and upon thy gates, and upon thy gates, that ye may remember and do all of my commandments, and be holy unto your God, unto your God, unto your God.
Later on in our service, I'll answer some of the questions that students submitted. Many of them were about how we relate to our Torah, and how we understand our place in history, and when we read our stories, how we read them on our calendar. Right now in the Jewish year, we're reading the story, the very beginning of the story of Exodus. And it's a story that we believe didn't just happen at one time in one place, but actually it's a story that is a parallel to our lives, a way of understanding what it feels like to be in the world, that the world can be broken into chapters in which we are born and created, a chapter in which we find ourselves enslaved, a chapter in which we find ourselves out of slavery, free, but in the wilderness, unsure of where we are to go, and a chapter where we find our promised land, where we know who we are, what our purpose is. The prayers that we're about to say recall that history and recall the present. Mi Chamocha, first, a prayer for freedom, the prayer that we believe the Israelites sang together the moment they experienced freedom for the first time and they took the first steps into the wilderness. And then the prayer Hashkivenu that follows, a prayer that we say for the present, for the feeling of when the day goes away from us and we enter into the night and fear increases and we have to remind ourselves that even as darkness increases, we can find ourselves to be at peace. First, the words of Mi Chamocha in our prayer book, words that remind us of the joys of freedom, page 40. Hashkivenu, page 42.
As I lay my head to rest, will you watch over me? Shield me from danger in the shelter of your wings, and illuminate my dreams. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu l'shalom, v'hamidenu shamreinu l'chaim, l'chaim. When the moon slips out of sight and the sun comes out to shine, will you return my soul to me when I open up my eyes? Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu l'shalom, v'hamidenu shamreinu l'chaim, l'chaim, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu l'shalom, v'hamidenu shamreinu l'chaim, l'chaim. Please join us in our Amidah, Rabbi.
Our Amidah is a series of prayers, begins on page 46. It goes for about 15 pages. We won't share every page, but we encourage you, if you're looking at our prayer book, to feel free to look at the prayers that go from one page to the next. Because the Amidah is a series of prayers that begins with a simple prayer asking us to have the ability to share what is most dear to us, as we'll say, God, open our lips that our mouths can declare your praise, a prayer to pray, followed by words that call upon the strength of our ancestors, the matriarchs and the patriarchs from our great stories, and on to prayers for the greatest source of peace to find its way into our world. This is the most personal aspect of our prayer in our service this evening. And so we invite you to rise once again as we face east. Page 46, we begin with our prayer for the strength to pray authentically and personally. Page 46.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachav, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, Elayon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avod v'Imahot, U'mevii Geula Libnei B'neihem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava. Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol atah Rav LaHoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem. Mechakel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayeh HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Berafech Olim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'el Gevurot, Umido Melach, Melech Memit Umechayeh, Umatmiach Yeshua. V'ne'eman atah lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol.
Those who are standing may be seated if they would like. A prayer for this day. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. The prayers that conclude our Amidah, page 60. First, the words of Shalom Rav. Shalom, a word, even if you don't know much about Judaism, you may know that shalom is a word that you often see as the welcome word of our people and our faith, as it means hello and goodbye, but also peace. And so we ask now for a great sense of peace, an overwhelming, abundant source of peace to find its way to our world. And we'll take a moment to pray silently after we share that prayer for peace, and then we'll share a closing prayer for peace for this section of our service, the Amidah.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. 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 V'ata u'melech Adam lecha shalom. Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tazim Le'olam.
Shalom Rav.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tazim Le'olam. Tazim Le'olam. Tazim Le'olam. Please take a moment for silent meditation. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. And it flows like a river. It flows like a river. It flows like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. And it flows like a fountain. It flows like a fountain. It flows like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like the ocean. I've got love like the ocean. I've got love like the ocean in my soul. And it flows like the ocean. It flows like the ocean. It flows like the ocean in my soul. Sim shalom tova tova uvracha achim b'chesed harachamim. Sim shalom tova tova uvracha achim b'chesed harachamim. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. And it flows like a river. It flows like a river. It flows like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. And it flows like a river. It flows like a river. It flows like a river in my soul.
Before we share the questions and responses to what many students from the confirmation classes at different churches sent into us, we're so grateful that you took the time in advance to do that. We miss having you here where we can have a dialogue and talk back and forth and hear each other's questions and see each other's faces. Before we get to the questions that you submitted, we want to take a moment and take note of the fact of how special this weekend is in for our country to celebrate the life of Martin Luther King Jr. In his famous letter from the Birmingham jail, where he, for very different reasons than we do today, sat isolated, separated, unable to be with other people, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. wrote words that are pertinent for us in this moment. He wrote, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. These times when we come together as faith groups from different corners, from different perspectives, and we see each other and understand who each other are and ask questions as our guests tonight have, those are moments where you help us to be more of who we ought to be, and we pray we help you to be more of who you ought to be as we honor our differences, not as things that divide us, but rather as aspects that make us more who we are and therefore allow us to be better together. And so it's a great honor to do our best to respond to the questions that you asked. There were a number of questions about our Torah scrolls, wonderful questions. Questions like, how old are they? Are they all the same? How many words are in the scroll? How big are they? And so I'm going to take us over to our ark. I feel a little bit like Mr. Rogers. Come over with me, and we'll open our ark. And I'll show you our many scrolls, but I'll tell you first that they're all exactly the same. Every Torah, part of what makes every Torah scroll special is that it is just like every other Torah scroll. Every word is identical from beginning to end. Sizes are different, but every word in every Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, what we call the books of Moses, often Genesis through Deuteronomy. So I'll open our ark, and Kylie's going to help by moving our camera over so that you can see the scrolls that we have and how we keep them. And then in a moment, we'll share an image of an open scroll and let you hear the sound of it being chanted. So join me over at our ark. So we keep our scrolls in an ark for a few reasons. One, it mimics the story of in our Bible of how the Torah, the story, and the commandments of the Israelites were kept in a very special place as they journeyed through the wilderness. But we also do it because we want to keep our Torah scrolls safe. The Torah is a very delicate object, and so inside each of these cases, these covers, hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit. There is a scroll inside, and inside that scroll are the Hebrew writings of those first 5 books. But we're very careful with it. You'll see in a minute in a picture when we hear Ken or Kathy chanting some of the Torah that we don't touch the Torah with our fingers because the oil from our skin will cause the ink to smear. And so we use a special tool to point at the words as we read them. And we keep them covered and protected, and we adorn them with silver so that they're beautiful and colorful, and we have this sense of joy and pride when we see our Torah scroll. And so I believe we have a picture. Normally when we have a Torah service, we take the Torah out, and we actually walk it around the room, and everybody reaches out to touch the Torah scroll, as you can see in that picture. This is during a service where we walk around and we take the Torah out and everybody stands and we sing while we carry the Torah around the room so that everybody can feel that they are personally close to the Torah and as we honor our story. I'm going to close our ark now and share some of the specifics to the questions that you asked. So, turn this one off. You made me do some research. I had to look up some stuff. How many words are in the Torah? I didn't know. This is the benefit of you asking your questions in advance. It turns out there's almost 80,000 words in the Torah. When we've unrolled our Torah scroll, it's gone almost from one side of this room all the way to the very back, which I know you can't see right now, but imagine you're in a large sanctuary. When the Torah is unrolled, it's very, very long. And one of the challenges of a Torah being in a scroll rather than a book is that it takes a while to get from one part to the next. So if I want to open up in this is also a Torah, but this is a book of a Torah, not the scroll. If I want to find Genesis in this book, I just open a Genesis. If I want to skip ahead to Deuteronomy, I just flip a couple hundred pages and I'm in Deuteronomy. When you put something in a scroll, you have to roll it. It takes a while. But the good news is you never have to use a bookmark, because wherever you stop reading in the scroll, that's where the scroll is left, which is also important because we read our Torah every week. This was another one of your questions, is how do you decide on the readings that you do every week? So every week, every Jewish community reads the exact same section of the Torah, and then the next week we read the very next following section. So we read the Torah in order from beginning to end, and it takes a year to read from beginning to end. There are 54 portions that we have separated the Torah into, and of course there are 52 weeks. So there are a couple times during the year where we usually read what we call a double portion. But everybody reads the same schedule every week. In the fall, we start over with the book of Genesis, which is why right now, in the middle of winter, we're in the book of Exodus. As we move through the year, we'll keep reading and get through Leviticus and Numbers and eventually to Deuteronomy, usually around the summer and towards the end of the summer. And then we begin Genesis again in the fall. So there is a very specific way in which we read Torah. So we're going to show you now, we'll show you a video in a minute, but we're going to show you the image first so that I can describe what the inside of a Torah scroll looks like. So you're looking now, if we were to open up a scroll, you see that metal pointer there, which we call a yad, because if you look closely at it, you'll see that the end of it has a little hand on it with a finger pointing at the scroll. And yad in Hebrew means hand. So we use this yad so that we can read the words that are in the Torah. But while you're looking at that, I want you to look past the yad, and you look at how straight the columns are of those words, all written in Hebrew. And you'll notice that there are no numbers or no notes in the margin. In the Torah, there are no verses that are numerated. There's no chapters. There's actually no punctuation, and there's actually no vowels. It's much like one long text that you would send to your friend. No punctuation, no vowels, no capitals, no end of sentences. And so we have said since the very beginning of reading Torah that it's always an interpretation, because without punctuation, you actually don't know exactly what it's trying to say. You have to interpret what it's saying, which is deeply important to us. The important aspect of Torah is not that we know exactly what it says, but rather that we study it. And we spend time debating what it means so that we can take meaning for our own lives from the Torah itself. The scroll itself is made out of animal skin, and it's written with a very special quill and very special ink by a person who is specially trained, and it usually takes about a year for somebody to handwrite the Torah beginning to end. And every Torah is identical, as I shared, and they can't make any mistakes. So when they make a mistake, they have to either cut that word out. You can take a thin knife and you slice the word out of the animal skin, or they have to redo that whole section. It's a very special practice, not only to write a Torah, but also to chant the Torah. And so we're going to play this video for you now, which has the sound of Cantor Kathy chanting the words of the Torah, as you'll hear what it sounds like when the Torah is chanted during one of our worship services.
Amen. Ve'achar ba'u Moshe ve'aharon v'yomeru el paro ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael shalach et ami v'yachogu li bamidbar v'yomer paro mi Adonai asher eshma v'kolo l'shalach et Yisrael.
So that's what it sounds like when we read Torah. It's a very specific way of chanting that helps give some feeling to the words and acts sort of like punctuation. There was a question about music. The question was, what type of music is traditionally played or sung during worship services? And so I'm going to ask Cantor Kathy to answer that question for us, since she's our musical professional and knows much more about it than I do.
So we have several prayers that are
chanted, but not in the way that you heard the Torah being chanted, because the Torah is chanted in something called trope, which are very specific, notated ways to chant specific words. The songs that you heard, the prayers that you heard that we chanted tonight were called the Chatzi Kaddish and the Amidah, our most personal prayer, where we faced east, we faced the ark, and we chanted and we bowed, and that's a different type of chanting. And those are very traditional prayers in our prayer book, and we rarely deviate from those specific melodies. However, we do have a lot of freedom because there are beautiful prayers in our liturgy, in our prayer book, and we've had many different people over the centuries to compose different ways to explain the beautiful prayers that we have in our tradition. One of the songs that you heard tonight was the Hashkivenu, and it was mostly in English. There was some Hebrew peppered in there, and that was written by a very good friend of my son, and he's a cantor in training, Josh Goldberg. So we have some up-and-coming musical artists that are composing music for our tradition that we are incorporating into our services, and then we have some music that's been composed over years and years that we still use and are considered very familiar to people, so that therefore they love those tunes, and we don't want to alter those either. And one of the prayers that you will hear after this explanation is called the Misha Berach, which is a prayer for healing. And the woman that composed that, her name is Debbie Friedman, who we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of her passing. And this particular composition has become a traditional prayer over the last several years, actually probably the last 30 years, because she's been around for a while, and it's just been embraced by congregations all over the world. So you will hear that soon.
Another question we got is, do all Jewish kids learn Hebrew? And do Jewish kids have something like confirmation? The answer to both of those is yes, sort of. Our children learn Hebrew. We do our best to teach them how to read Hebrew, and they have what is called a bar or a bat mitzvah, usually when they're around 13, where they read from the Torah, just like you heard Cantor Kathy doing a few moments ago. So they learn how to read Hebrew, but that's not easy. Hebrew is written right to left. It's different letters. It's a Semitic language. And in fact, somebody had asked they asked, why is Hebrew written in a different way? And it's very interesting. Hebrew is such an old language that originally it was chiseled into stone. And so if you imagine yourself, this is yet another reason why people who are left-handed can be angry. The world was really built for right-handed people, as we continue to hear from our lefty friends. That as you're chiseling, you chisel with your right hand. So it was hard if you went from the left to the right, as we write English, because you were actually making the letters with your left hand while you were chiseling with your right. So Hebrew was written right to left because in order to chisel from the right to the left, you wanted to use your dominant hand and be able to see the letters that you were writing. So a number of ancient languages, pictographs and languages like Hebrew were written right to left, and we continue to read them that way. So if you were using our prayer book for the first time, you noticed that what we would call in America the back of the book was actually the front of the book, because it is put together in a way that is dominant towards the Hebrew, which is written right to left. Our kids learn to read Hebrew. They don't learn how to speak Hebrew fluently, usually, unless they're exceptional with language, which is something we wish we could teach them, but there just isn't time, unfortunately. And we do have confirmation. In addition to bar and bat mitzvah, we do have confirmation, although that's something that we've borrowed from our Christian friends, as we've seen how meaningful it can be as our children become adults and as they embrace our faith and our traditions. We've included for the last couple hundred years, actually, a ceremony of confirmation that we take great pride in as they learn together, much like you do as high schoolers usually. Are there special meals for Shabbat? And is there a ritual like communion? There really is not a ritual like communion, although I would tell you that most Jewish people will tell you we have lots of special foods. We don't have many ritualized foods, meaning there aren't many foods that we utilize during a worship service. you will see that we will, at the end of our service, bless the bread, the challah, which is a special type of bread, and that we will bless the wine, which we call the Kiddush blessing. But those are not like communion in that they don't hold the same ritual importance and symbolism that communion holds often for Christian groups. And so for us, it's really the beginning of our celebratory meal. The way that we end our service is by starting the celebratory meal, which is our Shabbat meal. And at our Shabbat meal, we have a glass of wine and we have a special sweet bread to celebrate the beginning of Shabbat and having a family meal together, much like the tradition of having a Sunday night dinner that's common in the Western world or in countries where Christianity is a dominant religion. There's often a family meal on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening. On Shabbat, on Friday night, our community has our family meal together, and we begin that meal by sharing a blessing over bread and a blessing over wine to share how special that meal is. Where do the Hebrew people come from? This is our last question, our last series of questions. And are all Jewish people from Israel? And so it's a great question. The Jewish people are incredibly diverse, even though we are incredibly small in number. So just about 15 million Jews in the world, somewhere, it fluctuates a little bit, but somewhere around 15 million Jews in the world, which is not many if you think about how large other religions are in number. And yet, Jewish people come from all over the world. And we actually have we have different ethnicities within Judaism. So some people refer to themselves as Ashkenazi Jews, which means that their families came from Eastern Europe over the last 300, 400, 500 years. And some people call themselves Sephardic Jews, which means that their families at one time were in Spain and left, many of them around the time of 1492, which is a special date in American history, but in Jewish and world history, it's also the time of the Inquisition when Jews were expelled from Spain. And many of those Sephardic Jews moved east. Many Ashkenazi Jews moved east, but also moved west. So west from Europe is us. It's America. So many American Jews have an Ashkenazi background. Not all of them, but many. Many Jews who live in the eastern part of the world, in Israel and the Middle East, they have a Sephardic background, meaning that their families left the Spanish area and moved east. And there's also a group of Jews called Mizrahi Jews, which are Jews who have always been in the Middle East and never left. But that being said, Jewish people are living in Australia and South Africa, and many of their families have been there for many, many generations. Yes, originally we would say that in some ways, almost all people, all families who can trace their families back to being Jewish for many generations, eventually they would get back to people who lived in the state of Israel in biblical times. However, over the years, our families have blended with many other families, and we have today many interfaith families who have multiple faiths in their homes, and we have many people who converted to Judaism over the years. And so we can't say that all of the Jewish people can link themselves back to the geography, the location of Israel, but what we do believe above all else is that all Jewish people are Jewish and therefore connected to our tradition. And so what we like to say is, no matter how you became Jewish, whether you were born Jewish, whether you converted to being Jewish, we like to say, just like I mentioned earlier in our service, about life being a parallel to the story of our Torah, we say we were all at Sinai, meaning that we were all at Mount Sinai. All of us, all of our souls, all of us present in some way, no matter how we became a part of this people, that we were all there at the moment that the Torah was given to the Jewish people, and that we began to have these obligations that we call commandments as our guide on how to live our life. So those were the questions that you submitted. They were wonderful, wonderful questions. We're sorry that we can't be here together. Normally what we offer, in addition to lots of donuts at the end of our service, is the opportunity to ask more questions after the service is over. So I want to make this offer to you. If you have other questions please email me, rabbibrown@templeisraelakron.org. You can find that. You can connect through our website if you would like as well. And I will do my best to get back to you and answer any questions that you have now that you've been a part of our service. We thank you for all of the questions that you submitted and for allowing us to still have this special Shabbat that we enjoy so much. We're going to begin to conclude our service now as we turn to the prayers for healing and our prayers to offer comfort to those who've lost loved ones as we begin to close our service. You can join us again in our prayer book, page 253.
Mi sheberach avoteinu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We pray that all of those who are suffering in any way find the fullest sense of themselves, find a sense of healing, and find a way that they can connect with their families during these strange times so that they can be surrounded by those who love them once again. We turn to page 282. It's our prayer Aleinu, a prayer about our peoplehood and our connection to God as we invite you to stand and face east once again.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, l'tekedu la'liotzer b'reishit, shelo asanu k'goyei ha'aratzot, velo samanu k'mishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem v'goraleinu k'chol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh, Baruch Hu.
L'takein olam b'malchut Shaddai, Adonai our God, how soon we hope to behold the perfection of our world, guided by a sacred covenant drawn from human and divine meeting.
V'nemar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad, Ushemo echad.
Before we conclude our service, we offer first a prayer for all of those who've lost a loved one, and we'll share the names of those loved ones that have been lost recently, as well as the names of those that for whom it is the anniversary of their passing. This week, our thoughts especially go to the families that have lost someone in the last month. The families of Hope Fromson, Paula Nuringer, Sarah Ash, and Beverly Heineck. And we add to their names the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi David Alexander, George Block, Xenia Culliner, Anna Epstein, Estelle Fortnoff, Richard Gennaro, Julius Isroff, Bertie Kahn, Jerome J. Kaufman, Ruth K. Max Komorowski, Judge Nathan Kaplan, Edward H. Lazaro, David Lipman, Johanna Lieb, Morris Mostov, Ossie Ostrov, Jacob Pollack, Marty Rosenthal, Lillian Ross, Sonia Ross, Susan B. Rubenstein, Rebecca Salem, Esther Shapiro, Mildred Shapiro, Milton A. Shepler, Sam Sigalo, Helene Sternberg, Eva Teich, Ethel Emmerich Tyler, Jacob Umansky, and Donald Zern. The words we'll share now, the words of Mourner's Kaddish, are words dear to the hearts of all of those who've lost someone in our tradition. They do not speak of death, but rather of life. And so as we remember our loved ones, we think of the lives that they led, and we hope to keep their memories as a blessing as we share these sacred words. We invite you to rise if you are able. Page 294. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divarach hirutei v'amlich malchutei. B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. B'agala uv'izman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shemei dekudasha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, to all the world, as we say, amen. Having blessed and honored those that we've loved and lost, we bless each other now with the words that the priests share in our Torah, the words of the priestly benediction. We invite you to reach out if there are people in the room with you, connect with them, or to symbolically reach out as we connect with each other as we offer these words over one another. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious unto you. May you feel God's presence within you always, and may you find peace. We'll now share those blessings we mentioned a few moments ago, the blessings of Kiddush and Motzi. They're all the way back at the beginning of your prayer book, pages 4 and 5, as we'll begin with the words of Kiddush to sanctify this moment, the blessing over the wine.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodeshu b'yahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron l'masi v'reishit ki hu yom techila l'mikra kodesh zecher l'tziat mitzrayim kivanu v'charta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodeshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchatanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Amen.
A blessing over our challah, our bread for Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
A couple quick announcements. We want to alert people to at 2 p.m. this Sunday, there's an Interfaith vigil for the pandemic called Prayers for the Pandemic. You can check out the registration form on our Facebook page. The link is there. We're preparing to send, Sisterhood is preparing to send care packages for college students. So please email Pam Connery. You can find her email in the weekly email. This Monday, Martin Luther King Day breakfast. It is the Akron Urban League has invited us to be a partner in this really wonderful breakfast. And in fact, Rabbi Horowitz, our Rabbi Emeritus, and one of our former students, Abby Kushner-Benson, are both taking part in the service. And so we invite you to join us 9 o'clock on Monday morning. You can also find that information, I believe. It's definitely in our weekly email, but it might also be on our Facebook page. Next Sunday begins our class on ethical wills. There was information today emailed out about that. Please join us for that. And Thursday, the 28th, is our Jewish-Muslim dialogue, followed by the beginning of our Shared Legacy series, which you should have gotten an email about earlier this week. A wonderful series that is starting up as we focus on race, Jewish and black relations during the civil rights time, past, present, and future, and how we can be doing that work today. So we hope you'll join us for that. With that in mind, especially, we close with the words of "We shall overcome" as we enter into this Martin Luther King Jr. Weekend. We recall the words that so often have led us to be hopeful about our future, to take hate out of our world, to lift up justice, and to know that we can overcome those obstacles that are ahead of us. So please join us as we close with these wonderful gospel words, "We shall overcome."
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone someday. Oh, deep in my heart, we all believe that we shall overcome someday. Amen. And Shabbat Shalom.